She wasn't supposed to touch it. The M24 sniper rifle sat in its case during the annual weapons inspection, and when she knelt down to examine it, the range officer's voice cut through the morning air like a whip. "Ma'am, step back from that weapon. That's not for civilians." His hand moved toward her shoulder, ready to pull her away from equipment she had no business handling. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." But then she did something that made everyone within 20 feet go silent. She field stripped the rifle in 42 seconds flat, her hands moving with the kind of muscle memory that doesn't come from YouTube videos or weekend courses. And when she reassembled it and checked the scope alignment with movements so precise they looked choreographed, a 2-star general standing across the firing line stopped mid-conversation and stared at her like he'd seen a ghost, because that wasn't just skill. That was training from a program that officially never existed. Training that only 17 people in the world had ever completed. And 15 of them were dead. Want to know what the general recognized and why everything changed in that moment? Hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Let's begin. The autumn wind carried the smell of gun oil and fresh-cut grass across the grounds of Fort Kearsley in northern Wyoming. It was the kind of crisp October morning where your breath hung in the air, and the sun painted everything in shades of amber and gold. The distant peaks of the Bighorn Mountains stood like sentinels against a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. And somewhere in the valley below, a freight train's horn echoed through the canyon walls. Sergeant Kyle Brennan had been running the civilian marksmanship program for 3 years now, and he thought he'd seen everything. Soccer moms who couldn't hold a rifle steady. Retired cops with more ego than accuracy. Businessmen trying to relive their glory days at the range. The annual Fort Kearsley community shooting event drew all types, and most of them needed more supervision than a kindergarten field trip. The morning had started like any other. Registration tables set up near the main range building, waiver forms stacked in neat piles, safety briefings delivered with the enthusiasm of someone who'd given the same speech 1,000 times. Coffee percolated in industrial-sized urns, steam rising into the cool mountain air. The scent mixed with pine sap from the surrounding forest and the ever-present smell of Hops No. 9 cleaning. Solvent that seemed permanently embedded in the range house walls. About 40 civilians had registered for the day's events, mostly locals from the surrounding towns of Sheridan and Buffalo. They milled around the check-in area wearing a mixture of hunting jackets, tactical gear purchased from surplus stores, and one guy in a polo shirt who clearly thought this was going to be like Top Golf with guns. Their voices created a low buzz of excitement and nervous energy. That's when she arrived. Jenna Hartwick pulled into the gravel parking lot in a dusty Ford Ranger that had seen better decades. She was 43 years old, though she could have passed for younger if not for the way she carried herself, that particular brand of weariness that comes from seeing too much, too young. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans, hiking boots, and a plain gray hoodie with the University of Montana logo fading across the chest. No tactical vest. No range bag full of expensive accessories. Just a small backpack slung over one shoulder and an expression of quiet determination. She moved through registration with minimal conversation. Signed the waivers. Accepted the safety briefing with patient nods. When asked if she had any prior shooting experience, she simply said, "Some," in a voice that didn't invite follow-up questions. Brennan barely noticed her at first. She blended into the crowd of participants, just another face in the sea of people who wanted to say they'd shot military-grade weapons at an actual army base. He was more focused on the guy in the polo shirt who kept pointing his unloaded pistol in unsafe directions. Despite 3 separate corrections, the day's events included several stations. Basic rifle marksmanship with M4 South, pistol qualification courses, And the crown jewel that drew the most interest, a demonstration area, where military weapons were displayed for educational purposes. This included everything from squad automatic weapons to crew-served machine guns, all carefully supervised and used only for controlled demonstrations. And then there was the M24 sniper weapon system. It sat in its weatherproof case near the precision rifle demonstration area. A beautiful piece of engineering that represented the pinnacle of military marksmanship. The rifle was based on the Remington 700 Action, built to exacting specifications, capable of putting rounds on target at distances that seemed impossible to the untrained eye. Its Leupold scope caught the morning light, and the weapon had that particular aura that serious firearms carry, respect built into every component. Master Sergeant Tyrrell Dodson was running the precision rifle demonstration, explaining to a group of wide-eyed civilians how military snipers were trained, what distances they could effectively engage targets, and the patience required for that particular specialty. He was a patient instructor, good with crowds, and had that rare ability to make complex military operations understandable to people who'd never served a day in uniform. The civilians clustered around, asking questions, taking photos from a respectful distance. The M24 remained in its case, visible but untouchable, a museum piece more than a functional tool at this point. Though it was still fully operational and zeroed. That's when Jenna approached. She'd been quiet all morning, participating in the basic rifle events with competent but unremarkable performance. Nothing that would draw attention. Nothing that would make instructors take a second look. She hit center mass on her targets, followed all safety protocols, and remained politely distant when others tried to strike up conversations about hunting stories or their favorite firearms. But when she saw the M24, something changed in her expression. A flicker of recognition, maybe longing. Something that made her pause in her tracks and stare at the weapon like it was an old friend she hadn't expected to see again. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She walked toward the demonstration area with purpose now, her stride changing from casual observer to something more deliberate. The small crowd parted slightly as she approached, more out of coincidence than deference. Master Sergeant Dodson was in the middle of explaining the effective range of the system to a retired dentist from Billings who kept asking about Call of Duty accuracy. Jenna knelt down beside the case. Her hand reached out toward the rifle, fingers moving with intention. And that's when Sergeant Kyle Brennan noticed her for the first time. Really noticed her. "Ma'am," his voice carried across the demonstration area, sharp with authority and concern. "Step back from that weapon. That's not for civilians to handle." The small crowd went quiet. Heads turned. This was the kind of moment that could go very wrong very quickly untrained. Civilian reaching for a precision rifle worth more than most people's cars. Safety protocols about to be violated in front of witnesses. Brennan moved toward her, his hand already extending to pull her back, his mind already composing the incident report he'd have to file. But Jenna Hartwick didn't step back. Instead, she looked up at him with eyes that held something he couldn't quite identify, not defiance, not arrogance, just a quiet knowing, and said 4 words that would change everything about this ordinary October morning. "May I check it?" Jenna Hartwick hadn't planned on coming to Fort Kearsley that morning. In fact, she'd driven past the exit twice on Highway 90 before finally pulling off, arguing with herself the entire time about whether this was a good idea, or just picking at old wounds that had finally started to heal. She lived 40 minutes south in a small town called Riverside that barely qualified as a dot on most maps. Population 847. 1 gas station, 2 churches, and a diner that served breakfast all day because the owner couldn't be bothered to print a separate lunch menu. It was the kind of place people moved to when they wanted to disappear, and that suited Jenna just fine. Her house sat at the end of a gravel road with nothing but prairie, grass and sky in 3 directions. A modest single-story ranch with peeling blue paint and a porch that sagged slightly on the north end. Inside, everything was neat, organized, almost sterile in its efficiency. No photographs on the walls. No knickknacks collecting dust on shelves. Just functional furniture, a coffee maker that got more use than it should, and a gun safe in the bedroom closet that hadn't been opened in 6 years. She worked as a long-haul truck driver for a logistics company based out of Casper, running routes between Wyoming and Montana, sometimes pushing east into the Dakotas when they needed extra coverage. It was solitary work, which she preferred. Hours alone with the road stretching ahead, the hum of the engine, and radio stations that faded in and out as you crossed from one broadcast range to another. No coworkers asking personal questions. No obligations beyond delivering freight on time and keeping the rig maintained. Her dispatcher, a woman named Carol with a voice like gravel and cigarettes, had learned years ago not to ask Jenna about her past. Most of the other drivers assumed she was running from a bad divorce or maybe had some legal trouble she didn't want to discuss. They invented stories to fill the silence she left behind: witness protection, maybe, or a gambling debt. Or perhaps just one of those people who couldn't handle normal society. None of them would have guessed the truth. Because the truth wasn't something you could see in her weathered jeans and tired eyes. It wasn't visible in the way she kept to herself at truck stops, or how she always took the routes nobody else wanted. The truth was buried deeper than most people ever looked. Jenna had seen the flyer for the Fort Kersley community shooting event tacked to the bulletin board at a rest stop outside Sheridan. It was wedged between advertisements for a church bake sale and someone selling a used tractor. Open to the public. Experience military marksmanship. October 14th. Pre-registration required. She'd stared at that flyer for a full 5 minutes while her coffee went cold in her hand. And other travelers shuffled past to use the restrooms. Something about it pulled at her. Maybe it was the date October 14th had been significant once, though in a different year, a different life. Or maybe it was just the idea of holding a rifle again, feeling that weight. Remembering what it was like when her hands knew exactly what to do without her brain having to think about it. Against her better judgment. She'd taken a photo of the flyer with her phone and registered online that night from a motel room in Gillette. Sitting on a bed that smelled like industrial detergent and stale cigarette smoke despite the non-smoking sign on the door. The morning of the event. She'd woken at 0445 out of pure habit. Even though the event didn't start until 0900, old patterns died hard. She'd made coffee in the tiny pot provided by the motel, the kind that always tasted faintly like plastic no matter how many times you rinsed it. While it brewed, she'd done push-ups and sit-ups in the narrow space between the bed and the bathroom. Not because she was training for anything anymore, but because not doing them felt wrong somehow. In the shower, she'd caught herself thinking about the last time she'd held an M24. The muscle memory was still there, filed away in some corner of her mind that never forgot, even when she wanted it to. She could still feel the weight of it, the slight resistance of the bolt. The way the scope's reticle settled onto target with that particular clarity that came from thousands of hours of practice. By 0730, she was on the road, the Ranger's heater fighting against the October cold that seeped through the worn weather stripping around the doors. The radio played classic country, Waylon Jennings reminding her that mamas shouldn't let their babies grow up to be cowboys. She'd smiled slightly at that, thinking about all the things mamas probably shouldn't let their babies grow up to be. The drive took her through landscapes she knew by heart. Rolling prairie giving way to pine-covered foothills, the Bighorn Mountains rising in the distance like a promise or a threat, depending on your perspective. Ranch land stretched for miles, cattle grazing in morning mist that clung to the low places. Fence posts marching toward the horizon in endless procession. She'd passed the fort, Kersley exit the first time without slowing down, telling herself this was stupid, that going back to anything military-related was asking for trouble, that some doors were better left closed. But 10 miles down the highway, she'd taken the next exit, circled back, and done it again. The second time, she made it another 15 miles before turning around. The third time, she took the exit. Fort Kersley wasn't like the massive installations you saw on the news. It was a regional training facility, modest in size, focused primarily on National Guard readiness and community relations. The main gate was staffed by bored-looking MPs who checked IDs with the enthusiasm of people working a Saturday shift. Chain-link fencing marked the perimeter, not the serious fortifications you'd find at more sensitive locations. The shooting range complex sat on the western edge of the base, accessible to civilians for events like this without requiring them to venture into restricted areas. Smart design, all the public relations benefit of community engagement without any security headaches. When Jenna pulled into the gravel parking lot, she'd sat in her truck for a solid 5 minutes, hands still on the wheel, engine ticking as it cooled. Around her, families were unloading. Excited kids asking parents if they could shoot the big guns. Men with expensive cameras preparing to document every moment. Everyone seemed relaxed, happy, treating this like a field trip. She'd almost left then. Almost fired up the Ranger and headed back to Riverside. Back to her empty house and her predictable routes and her carefully constructed life that didn't include rifles or ranges, or anything that reminded her of who she used to be, but she didn't. Instead, she'd grabbed her backpack, locked the truck, and walked toward the registration tables with the kind of determination that came from making a decision and refusing to second-guess it. The backpack was old, military surplus, faded and worn, with frayed straps she'd repaired with duct tape. Inside was nothing remarkable: a water bottle, some granola bars, her registration confirmation printed on paper from the motel's business center, and her driver's license. No tactical gear, no rangefinder, no custom shooting gloves or fancy ear protection. Just the basics. She moved through the registration process on autopilot, signing waivers without reading them, nodding at safety briefings she could have recited from memory. The staff manning the tables were friendly in that forced way that comes from dealing with the public. Bright smiles, scripted welcomes, name tags with first names only. A younger soldier, maybe 22 with a specialist rank, had checked her in. Any prior shooting experience? He'd asked, pen hovering over a form. Some, Jenna had replied, her tone flat enough to discourage follow-up questions. He'd marked something on the form and handed her a visitor badge with a lanyard. Stations are set up around the range complex. Feel free to participate in any activities. Stay behind the safety lines, follow instructor directions, and have fun. Fun, right. She'd pinned the badge to her hoodie and drifted toward the basic rifle range, where civilians were taking turns with M4 carbines under close supervision. The weapons were tethered to the firing stations with steel cables, a sensible precaution when dealing with untrained shooters. Instructors stood behind each shooter, offering guidance, making corrections, praising mediocre groups with the patience of people who did this regularly. Jenna had waited her turn, watching others fumble with magazines, struggle with sight pictures, and flinch at recoil. When her turn came, she'd performed competently but not remarkably. Center mass hits, good trigger control, nothing that would make anyone look twice. Just another civilian with some prior experience. Between stations, she'd walked the grounds, observing without engaging. The autumn morning was beautiful in that sharp, clear way that Wyoming October mornings could be. The smell of gunpowder mixed with pine sap and that particular scent of dried grass that came with the season. Conversation flowed around her people, comparing their performances, making jokes about their accuracy, discussing what they wanted to try next. She'd grabbed coffee from the table set up near the range office. Terrible coffee, weak and bitter, but hot. And the disposable cup warmed her hands as she wandered toward the demonstration area where Master Sergeant Tyrell Dodson was holding court. That's when she'd seen it, the M24 sniper weapon system, sitting in its case like a relic from another life, and despite every instinct telling her to walk away, to leave it alone, to maintain the careful distance she'd built between her present and her past, Jenna Hartwick had found herself moving toward it like gravity was pulling her in that direction. Her heart rate had picked up slightly. Not panic, just recognition. Like seeing an old friend you'd left behind under circumstances too complicated to explain. The rifle represented so much more than metal and wood and precision optics. It represented a version of herself she'd worked very hard to forget. But forgetting, she was learning, was different than being forgotten. Sergeant Kyle Brennan's hand was 6 inches from Jenna's shoulder when Master Sergeant Tyrell Dodson raised his hand in a stopping gesture. There was something in the way the woman had asked, not demanding, not entitled, just a simple question delivered with the kind of calm that spoke of absolute certainty. "Ma'am, this weapon system isn't part of the hands-on demonstration," Dodson said, his tone professional but firm. He'd been doing this job long enough to recognize when civilians got overly enthusiastic about equipment they saw in video games or movies. "It's here for educational purposes only. We can answer questions about its capabilities, but handling is restricted to certified personnel." The small crowd that had gathered around the precision rifle display shifted uncomfortably. A few people pulled out their phones, sensing something interesting might be developing. The retired dentist from Billings took a step back, suddenly aware that he might be witnessing either an embarrassing confrontation or a security incident, remained kneeling beside the case, her hand still extended toward the M24, but not touching it. She looked up at Dodson with an expression that held no challenge, no frustration, just that same quiet knowing that had unsettled Brennan moments before. "I understand, Sergeant," she said softly, "but someone's been adjusting your scope mounts. The front ring is torqued maybe 15 degrees off specification. Won't affect accuracy at close range. But anything past 600 meters and your elevation adjustments are going to track inconsistently." The demonstration area went absolutely silent. Dodson's eyes narrowed. "That wasn't information you picked up from internet forums or gun magazines. That was the kind of specific, technical knowledge that came from working with the weapon system. Extensively, the kind of detail that even experienced shooters might miss, but that would drive a trained sniper absolutely insane because they'd know. They'd feel it in the way the rifle performed." "How would you know that?" Dodson asked, his voice losing some of its instructional tone and taking on something sharper, more assessing. Jenna didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly stood, keeping her hands visible, moving with the kind of deliberate care that spoke of someone who understood how nervous people with authority could get when protocols were being bent. She was maybe 5'6", average build, nothing physically imposing about her. But the way she carried herself had changed, subtly less like a civilian on a recreational outing, and more like someone who just stepped back into a familiar role she'd left behind. "The reflection off the front objective lens," she said, gesturing without pointing directly. "It's catching the sun at a slight cant. Could be the rings, could be the base. Either way, someone's been doing maintenance without a torque wrench, or they cross-threaded something during the last cleaning." Brennan exchanged a glance with Dodson. This was getting weird. Civilians didn't talk like this. Hell, most regular infantry didn't talk like this. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification," Brennan said, his hand moving toward his radio. This was the point where things either resolved into something explainable or escalated into something he'd need backup for. "And I need to know what your background is with military weapon systems." Before Jenna could respond, a voice cut across the range from near the main observation area. "Is there a problem here, Sergeant?" Everyone turned. Colonel Raymond Aldrich, Fort Kersley's deputy commander, was walking toward the demonstration area with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested he'd been watching this unfold and had decided it required his attention. He was in his early 50s, wearing a crisp BDU uniform, his silver oak leaves catching the morning sun. Behind him, maintaining a respectful distance, was his aide, a young lieutenant who looked like he was taking mental notes on how colonels handled unusual situations. Brennan straightened. "Sir, we have a civilian who's requesting to handle the M24 demonstration piece. She's making some technical observations about the weapons condition that are unusually specific." Aldrich approached, his eyes moving from the sergeants to Jenna, assessing the situation with the practiced ease of someone who'd dealt with countless unpredictable scenarios. His gaze lingered on her for a moment, taking in the faded hoodie, the worn hiking boots, the complete lack of anything that screamed, "I know about precision rifle systems." "And you are?" Aldrich asked, his tone neutral but carrying weight. "Jenna Hartwick." "Sir," she replied, and there it was, the automatic "sir," delivered with the kind of crisp respect that came from years of military bearing drilled into muscle memory. Not the casual "sir" that civilians used when they were being polite, but the specific pronunciation that marked someone who'd served. Aldrich caught it. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, one eyebrow raising just slightly. "Prior service?" he asked. Jenna hesitated. This was the moment. She could deflect, could give a vague answer and walk away from this entire situation before it went somewhere she wasn't sure she wanted it to go. She could return to her truck, drive back to Riverside, and pretend this morning had never happened. "Yes, sir," she said finally. "Army, 10 years. MOS?" Aldrich pressed, using the military term for job specialty. Another hesitation, longer this time. The crowd around them had grown word spreading through the demonstration area that something interesting was happening, that a colonel was personally involved, that some woman was having an intense conversation with base leadership over a rifle. "Sir." With respect, "That was a long time ago," Jenna said carefully. "I'm just here for the civilian program. I didn't mean to cause any disruption." Dodson, who'd been studying her throughout this exchange, spoke up. "Colonel, her observation about the scope mounting is accurate. I had Specialist Torres clean the weapon system yesterday, and when I checked his work this morning, something felt off about the scope tracking, but I couldn't identify it immediately. She spotted it from 6 feet away based on light reflection." Aldrich's expression became more focused. "That wasn't luck. That wasn't casual knowledge. That was expertise." "Ms. Hartwick," he said, his tone shifting from neutral inquiry to something more direct, "I'm going to ask you again, and I'd appreciate a straight answer. What was your MOS?" The October wind picked up slightly, carrying the smell of pine down from the surrounding forest. Somewhere across the range complex, a whistle blew, and instructors began rotating civilians to new stations. Normal operations continuing while this strange moment stretched out. Jenna looked at the M24 in its case, then back at the colonel. She'd carried this secret for so long, had worked so hard to be invisible, to be unremarkable, to leave that life completely behind. But standing here, with the weight of their attention on her, with that rifle right there, looking like it needed someone who actually knew how to treat it properly, something in her resistance crumbled. 11 Bravo, she said quietly, using the designation for infantry. Then, after a pause that felt like jumping off a cliff, she added, "Specialized assignment. Precision Marksman Program. Advanced Marksmanship Training Cycle. Class of 2009. The effect was immediate." Dodson's eyes widened. Brennan's hand dropped from his radio. Even Aldrich, who'd seen enough in his career not to be easily surprised, looked at her with new intensity. "The Sentinel program," Dodson said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jenna didn't confirm or deny, but she didn't have to. Her silence was answer enough. The Sentinel program had been one of the Army's most selective and most classified training initiatives. Created in the mid-2000s to produce precision marksmen who could operate independently in complex, urban and mountain environments. It had graduated fewer than 50 soldiers before being quietly disbanded in 2012. The training was brutal, the standards impossible, and the operational deployments were so classified that most participants never acknowledged publicly that they'd been part of it. Class of 2009 had been particularly notorious within the small community that knew about such things. That was the class that had deployed to the mountain regions along the way Afghan-Pakistan border during some of the heaviest fighting of the war. The class that had taken 70% casualties. The class that had achieved mission success rates that seemed statistically impossible until you understood the caliber of people they'd selected and what they'd put them through. Jesus, Brennan muttered, then immediately looked embarrassed for having spoken out loud. Aldrich studied Jenna with new eyes, seeing past the civilian clothing and the years of distance, recognizing something in her bearing that he should have caught earlier. How many graduated in your class? 17, Jenna said, her voice flat, emotionless in the way people's voices got when they were discussing things that hurt too much for feeling. Deployed together. Operated in 5-person teams across Kunar and Nuristan provinces. How many made it home? The question hung in the air like smoke. Somewhere in the distance, someone laughed at something, the sound jarring against the weight of this conversation. 4, Jenna finally answered. 4 of us made it home. The mathematics of that statement settled over the group like a physical weight. 17 went out. 4 came back. 13 soldiers, highly trained, carefully selected, gone. Not just casualties, erasures. People whose sacrifice couldn't be publicly acknowledged because the missions they died on officially never happened. Aldrich's jaw tightened. He was old enough, experienced enough to know about operations that lived in the shadows. About soldiers who did impossible things in impossible places and never got the recognition they deserved because national security demanded their silence. And you were one of the 4, he said. Not a question. Jenna nodded once, a small, tight gesture that carried the weight of survivors' guilt and years of silence and memories that probably woke her up at 3 a.m. still. Even after all this time, Colonel Aldrich looked at the M24 in its case, then back at Jenna Hartwick standing there in her faded hoodie, worn jeans, looking like any other civilian who'd shown up for a Saturday morning at the range. He made a decision in that moment, the kind of command decision that colonels made when they recognized that protocol sometimes needed to bend for reasons that mattered more than regulations. Sergeant Dodson, he said, his voice carrying the tone of direct orders being given. I want that scope mounting checked and corrected. Use Ms. Hartwick's assessment as your guide. If she says it's torqued wrong, it's torqued wrong. Yes, sir, Dodson replied immediately. Then Aldrich turned to Brennan. Kyle, I need you to make a phone call for me. Contact General Patricia Reeves at Mountain Division Headquarters. Tell her we may have one of her former Sentinel operators here, and ask if she has any guidance on how we should proceed. Brennan's face went pale. General Reeves wasn't just any general. She was the officer who'd created and run the Sentinel program, who'd hand-selected every trainee, who'd fought bureaucratic battles to keep the program funded, and who'd reportedly attended every single funeral of every soldier lost from her classes. Sir, double quotes Brennan started, then stopped, realizing there was no good way to finish that sentence. Make the call, Sergeant, Aldrich said firmly. Now, as Brennan hurried toward the range office, radio already in hand. Aldrich turned back to Jenna. His expression had softened slightly, the command authority mixing with something more human respect, perhaps, or recognition of shared understanding about what service really cost. "Ms. Hartwick," he said quietly, "I think we're going to need to continue this conversation somewhere more private. Would you mind accompanying me to the range headquarters?" It wasn't really a request, but he'd phrased it politely, giving her the dignity of choice even though they both knew this wasn't optional anymore. Once you identified yourself as a Sentinel graduate, especially to someone like Aldrich who understood what that meant, the wheels of military bureaucracy started turning whether you wanted them to or not. Jenna looked one more time at the M24, at the rifle she'd spotted from across the demonstration area, at the weapon system that had pulled her into this situation in the first place. Part of her regretted ever approaching it, ever opening her mouth, ever coming to this event at all. But another part of her, the part that had survived Kuna province and carried 13 names in her memory, like stones, felt something she hadn't felt in years. Something like recognition. Something like belonging. "Lead the way." "Sir," she said. The range headquarters was a single-story concrete building that smelled like coffee, gun oil, and the particular mustiness that came from decades of military use. Inside, fluorescent lights hung overhead, illuminating walls covered with safety posters, qualification score sheets, and photographs of range record holders dating back to the 1980s. A window air conditioning unit rattled in the corner, fighting against the October warmth that had started building as the morning progressed. Colonel Aldrich led Jenna through the main office area where administrative staff looked up curiously from their desks, past a break room where someone had left half a pot of coffee burning on the warmer, and into a small conference room at the back of the building. The room held a scarred wooden table, 6 mismatched chairs, a whiteboard with faded marker stains that wouldn't erase, and a window that looked out over the rifle ranges where civilians continued their recreational shooting, oblivious to the conversation about to unfold. "Please sit," Aldrich said, gesturing to one of the chairs before taking a seat across from her. His aide, the young lieutenant, positioned himself near the door, not blocking it, but present. Standard protocol when a commanding officer was having an unusual conversation with an unknown civilian. Jenna sat, her backpack still slung over one shoulder. She didn't set it down, didn't relax into the chair. Her posture remained upright, controlled, ready to move if necessary. Old habits. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Through the window, they could hear the muffled sound of rifle fire, instructors calling out corrections, the normal rhythms of a range in operation. But inside this room, the silence stretched out with weight. Aldrich pulled a small notepad from his breast pocket, the kind every field-grade officer seemed to carry along with a pen. He clicked it once, then seemed to reconsider, setting both items on the table unused. "I'm not interrogating you," he said finally, his voice dropping the formal command tone and taking on something more conversational. "And you're not in any trouble. I want to be clear about that up front. You're here as a civilian participating in a community event. You have every right to walk out that door right now if you want to." Jenna's eyes flickered toward the lieutenant by the door, then back to Aldrich. "But you'd prefer I didn't." "I'd prefer you didn't," he confirmed. "Because in about 10 minutes, Sergeant Brennan is going to get through to General Reeves' office, and when he mentions your name and your class designation, things are going to start happening very quickly. I'd like to understand the situation before that occurs." "What situation?" Jenna asked carefully. "I'm just someone who noticed a scope mounting issue." Aldrich leaned back in his chair, studying her with the kind of assessment that came from years of evaluating soldiers, reading body language, understanding when people were holding back. "Ms. Hartwick, or should I say Sergeant Hartwick? It's just Jenna now. I've been out for 6 years. Jenna, then." Aldrich paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've been in the Army for 28 years. I've served in 3 combat deployments. I've commanded at every level from platoon to battalion. And in all that time, I've met maybe 5, maybe 6 soldiers who had the kind of specialized training you went through. Every single one of them was exceptional. And every single one of them carried something heavy. Jenna's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. But she said nothing. The Sentinel program wasn't like other special operations training, Aldrich continued. It wasn't about making you faster or stronger or more aggressive. It was about making you invisible, making you patient, teaching you to wait for days, weeks if necessary, for one perfect shot that could change the outcome of an entire operation. It was about turning soldiers into something else entirely. Something most people couldn't understand and wouldn't want to become even if they could. You seem to know a lot about a program that was classified. Jenna observed quietly. I was Battalion S3 at Forward Operating Base Joyce in 2010, Aldrich said. Kunar Province. We had a Sentinel team operating in our area of responsibility. I never knew their names. They were compartmented. We weren't briefed on their identities, but I saw the results of their work. 3 high-value targets eliminated in situations where conventional operations would have cost dozens of American lives. Taliban commanders who thought they were untouchable suddenly weren't. Enemy supply lines that ran through mountain passes we couldn't patrol. Disrupted by someone who could shoot accurately at distances that seemed impossible. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. And then one day, they were gone. Extracted in the middle of the night, no explanation, no debriefing for us. 6 weeks later, I heard through unofficial channels that something had gone wrong. An operation in the mountains near the border. Heavy casualties among the Sentinel teams. The program was quietly shut down shortly after. Jenna's hands, resting on the table, had curled into loose fists. Not aggressive, just tension bleeding through carefully maintained control. I don't talk about that operation, she said. Her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not asking you to, Aldrich replied gently. But I need to understand why you're here. Why now? Why you walked up to that M24 like it was calling to you. Before Jenna could answer, the door opened. Sergeant Brennan entered, his face flushed, slightly out of breath from what must have been a fast walk back from the range office. Behind him came Master Sergeant Dodson, carrying a tablet computer with the screen displaying what looked like personnel records. Sir, Brennan said, his voice tight with barely controlled urgency. I got through to General Reeves' office. Her aide said she's in a meeting, but when I mentioned Sentinel and gave the name. He paused, glancing at Jenna with something that might have been awe or might have been fear. Sir, they told me to hold the line. 30 seconds later, the general herself came on. She's en route. She's flying here personally. 8 and 90 minutes. The room went very still. She's coming here? Aldrich said, his tone suggesting this was not a normal occurrence. To Fort Kersley? Today? Yes, sir. She said, and I quote, if that's really Hartwick, I'll be there myself. Do not let her leave that base. Make her comfortable, treat her with respect. But do not let her leave. She was very clear about that last part. Sir, Aldrich turned slowly to look at Jenna, his expression shifting from curiosity to something more complex understanding, perhaps. That he was dealing with someone more significant than he'd initially realized. Dodson stepped forward, holding up the tablet. Sir, I pulled her service record. Most of it's redacted, but what's their ... He trailed off, seeming unsure how to proceed. Show me, Aldrich said. Dodson turned the tablet around. Even from where Jenna sat, she could see the document displayed her official service record, or what remained of it after classification protocols had done their work. Large sections were blacked out entirely. Dates of service visible, but locations redacted. Awards listed but citations classified. Deployment records present, but unit assignments removed. What was visible told a story in fragments. Expert marksmanship badge with multiple bars. Good Conduct Medal, National Defense Service Medal, Afghanistan Campaign Medal with multiple service stars. And then, in a section that hadn't been completely redacted, a single line that made Aldrich's breath catch slightly. Bronze Star with Valor. Device, citation classified. Not just a Bronze Star for meritorious service, but one with the V device that indicated valor in combat. The kind of award that meant someone had done something extraordinary under fire. Something that put them directly in harm's way to accomplish a mission or save lives. There's more, Dodson said quietly, scrolling down. 3 Army Commendation Medals, all with classified citations. 2 Purple Hearts with dates redacted. And here, he zoomed in on a section. Recommended for Silver Star. Recommendation withdrawn due to operational security concerns. Aldrich looked from the tablet to Jenna, who sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable. Withdrawn due to operational security concerns, he repeated slowly. That means you did something that deserved the Silver Star, but acknowledging it publicly would compromise classified information. Jenna finally spoke, her voice flat, emotionless. I did my job. Same as thousands of other soldiers. No, Aldrich said firmly. Not the same. The Silver Star is the 3rd highest decoration for valor. It's given for gallantry in action against an enemy. And they wanted to give it to you but couldn't because whatever you did was too classified to explain. Sir, there's something else, Dodson interjected. He navigated to another screen. Her training records show qualification scores on the M24 system that are... I've never seen anything like this. Maximum score on every qualification, multiple times. Long-range accuracy scores that exceed what I thought was possible with that weapon system. And notes from her instructors, exceptional patience, unprecedented fieldcraft. Recommended for highest level operations. Brennan had moved closer to look at the tablet over Dodson's shoulder. Jesus, he muttered. She's not just a Sentinel graduate. She was one of the best they ever trained. I was adequate, Jenna said quietly. But there was something in her tone, not quite bitterness, but close to it. Adequate enough to come home when better soldiers didn't. The words hung in the air like an accusation, though it wasn't clear who or what she was accusing. Herself, perhaps. Or fate. Or the random chaos of combat that determined who lived and who died regardless of skill or preparation or worthiness. Aldrich closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, his expression had shifted to something deeper, the look of someone who'd lost people under his command and understood the particular weight of survivor's guilt. How many were in your immediate team? He asked softly. Jenna was quiet for several heartbeats. Outside, a whistle blew, signaling a ceasefire on one of the ranges. The sudden silence made the conference room feel even more isolated, more removed from the normal world continuing just beyond these walls. 5, she finally answered. We operated as a 5-person team. 2 primary marksmen, 1 spotter, 1 communications specialist, 1 security element. We'd been together since selection, trained together for 18 months, deployed together. We knew each other's breathing patterns, could communicate with hand signals in complete darkness, could read each other's minds when things went sideways. And after the operation near the border, Aldrich pressed gently. Jenna's hands tightened on the table. After the operation, I was the only one still breathing. The statement dropped into the room like a stone into still water, ripples of impact spreading outward in the silence that followed. Even the lieutenant by the door shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware he was witnessing something more profound than a routine military conversation. Dodson set the tablet down carefully, as if it had suddenly become too heavy to hold. Brennan looked away, toward the window, giving Jenna the dignity of not having to meet anyone's eyes while she carried that. Wait, Aldrich let the silence stretch for a moment, understanding that some truths needed space to exist before you could move past them. Then, his voice gentle but firm, he asked the question that mattered most. "Jenna, why did you come here today? After 6 years of being out, after building a civilian life, why walk onto a military base and put yourself anywhere near a rifle that would remind you of all this?" For the first time since entering the conference room, Jenna's carefully maintained control showed cracks. Her jaw worked as if she was fighting to keep words inside, to maintain the walls she'd built around the parts of herself that hurt too much to examine. Her eyes went distant, looking at something beyond the walls of this room, beyond Fort Kersley, beyond Wyoming entirely. "Because," she said finally, her voice rough with emotion she'd been suppressing for years, "I saw that flyer at a rest stop. And the date was October 14th. And 6 years ago today, on October 14th, my team went into the mountains on a mission that wasn't supposed to be dangerous. We were providing overwatch for a convoy, simple stuff, routine. And everything went wrong in ways we couldn't predict, couldn't prepare for, couldn't survive." She paused, her breathing slightly unsteady now. 4 of the best soldiers I ever knew died on October 14th. And every year on this date, I wake up and I'm still here, and they're not, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. So this year I thought maybe if I came here, if I held a rifle again, if I proved to myself that I could still do the things they taught me, that maybe. Her voice broke slightly, and she stopped, swallowing hard, fighting for composure. "Maybe it would make sense somehow," Aldrich finished quietly. "Maybe it would help you understand why you survived when they didn't." Jenna nodded once, not trusting herself to speak. Brennan, still standing near the tablet, cleared his throat softly. "Sir, General Reeves' estimated arrival is now 75 minutes. What do we do until then?" Aldrich stood slowly, his decision made. "We treat our guest with the respect she's earned. Jenna, would you like some proper coffee? The stuff in the break room is terrible, but it's hot." Jenna looked up at him, surprised by the simple humanity of the gesture. "Coffee would be good, sir." "Thank you." "And then," Aldrich continued, "if you're willing, I'd like to hear about your team. Not about the classified operation, not about what happened in the mountains. Just about who they were. Because soldiers who die on classified missions don't get remembered publicly. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't be remembered at all." For the first time since this entire morning had started, Jenna's expression softened slightly. Not quite a smile, but something gentler than the careful blankness she'd been maintaining. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "I'd like that very much." The coffee was every bit as terrible as Colonel Aldrich had promised, burnt, bitter, and somehow both too weak and too strong at the same time. But Jenna wrapped her hands around the styrofoam cup and drank it anyway, grateful for something to do with her hands, something to focus on besides the weight of all the eyes that kept finding her. Word had spread through Fort Kersley's range complex with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. A sentinel operator, here, one of the ghosts from the program everyone had heard rumors about, but nobody really knew. Within 20 minutes of Brennan's phone call to General Reeves' office, half the range staff had found reasons to walk past the headquarters building, to glance through windows, to whisper among themselves about the woman in the faded hoodie who'd done things none of them could imagine. Aldrich had moved them to his personal office, larger than the conference room, with actual comfortable chairs and a door he could close against the growing curiosity outside. His desk was neat but lived in, with family photos in simple frames. A collection of challenge coins from various units displayed in a shadow box, and a stack of paperwork that suggested he'd been in the middle of normal Saturday administrative work before this situation had erupted. Jenna sat in one of the visitor chairs, still holding her coffee, still wearing her backpack like she might need to leave quickly. The young lieutenant had been dismissed, Aldrich deciding this conversation didn't need an audience, leaving just the colonel and Jenna in the quiet space. Their names were Tyler Moss, Rachel Kincaid, James Chun, and Robert Dupree, Jenna said without preamble, as if she'd been holding those names in her mouth for so long that releasing them was both painful and necessary. We called ourselves Team Copper. Not official designation, just something we came up with during training because we were told we'd be worth our weight in copper if we made it through selection. Aldrich settled into his desk chair, listening with the kind of attention that made it clear this wasn't just polite interest. This mattered. Tyler was from Oklahoma, Jenna continued, her voice taking on a quality that suggested she was somewhere else now, remembering. Farm kid, grew up hunting whitetail with his grandfather. He could read terrain like most people read books, just understood instinctively how elevation and wind and vegetation would affect a shot. He was our primary spotter, and he never, not once in 18 months of operations, gave me a bad wind call. She paused, sipping the terrible coffee, her eyes distant. Rachel was our communications specialist. Prior service Marine, which she never let us forget. She'd been a linguist before transitioning to Sentinel training, spoke Pashto and Dari fluently, could understand Urdu well enough to get by. But more than that, she understood people. Could listen to radio chatter and tell you not just what they were saying, but what they were feeling. Whether they were scared or confident or lying. Outside Aldrich's office window, the mountain peaks were becoming clearer as the morning haze burned off. The October sun climbed higher, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. James was security element. Smallest guy on the team, maybe 5'7", but he moved through terrain like water, quiet, efficient, never where you expected him to be. He'd grown up in Seattle, urban kid, which made it weird that he was better at mountain fieldcraft than guys who'd been camping their whole lives. He used to say cities taught you to be invisible, and mountains were just cities with different architecture. Jenna's hands tightened slightly on the coffee cup. And Robert. Robert was my shooting partner. Second marksman. He was from Louisiana, Cajun background, had this accent that got thicker when he was tired or stressed. He could shoot almost as well as I could, maybe better on some days. We used to compete during training, stupid stuff, like who could hit a target at 1,200 meters in crosswinds, who could do a faster rifle breakdown in cleaning. He beat me more often than I beat him. Sounds like a solid team, Aldrich observed quietly. We were better than solid, Jenna said, and there was no arrogance in it, just statement of fact. We were perfect. We could operate for weeks without external support, move through hostile territory without detection, eliminate high-value targets, and extract before anyone knew we'd been there. In 14 months of deployment, we completed 23 missions. Every single one successful. 0 friendly casualties. 0 compromised positions. We were so good that command started requesting us specifically for the operations nobody else wanted. She set the coffee cup down on the edge of Aldrich's desk. Carefully, precisely. And that's why we were in those mountains on October 14th. Because we were the team they trusted with the impossible missions. Because we'd never failed. Because someone in a headquarters somewhere looked at an intelligence report about a high-value target moving through terrain no conventional unit could reach, and they thought, send Team Copper. They can handle it. The office was very quiet. Even the ambient sounds from outside range fire, voices, vehicles seemed muted, as if the world had decided to give this conversation the silence it required. What happened? Aldrich asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer would be something classified. Something she couldn't or shouldn't share. Jenna was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled, each word chosen with precision to avoid classified details while still conveying truth. The intelligence was wrong. Not bad intelligence, not neglectful, just wrong in ways nobody could have predicted. The target we were observing wasn't alone. The mountain pass we thought was remote and unguarded turned out to be part of a major enemy movement corridor. And when we were compromised not through any failure on our part, just circumstances we couldn't control, we found ourselves in a defensive position against odds that were insurmountable. She paused, her jaw working. We held for 7 hours. Called for extraction, but the weather had turned. Helicopters couldn't fly in those conditions. QRF couldn't reach us on foot in time. The terrain was too rough, the enemy too numerous. So we held, Tyler calling out targets, Rachel coordinating with command, James protecting our flank, Robert and I shooting until our barrels were so hot we had to swap rifles to let them cool. Aldrich's hands had formed into fists on his desk, his knuckles white. He'd heard stories like this before, soldiers in impossible situations, doing impossible things, paying impossible prices. They died in order, Jenna continued, her voice taking on an almost mechanical quality, as if emotion would break her completely if she let it in. James first, when the enemy tried to flank our position. He stopped them, but it cost him. Then Rachel, when an RPG hit close enough that the overpressure. She didn't suffer long. Tyler held on for another hour after that, kept giving me and Robert wind calls, even after he was hit, even after he should have been focused on his own wounds. She stopped, swallowing hard. And Robert was still shooting when the weather cleared enough for extraction. Still putting rounds downrange, still protecting our position. The helicopter was 90 seconds out when he took fire that ... She couldn't finish that sentence. He asked me to make sure his family knew he didn't quit, that he was still fighting when it ended. That was important to him. Aldrich's voice was rough when he spoke. And you? I made it to the helicopter, Jenna said simply. I was wounded shrapnel, nothing critical, but I made it. I was extracted. I survived. While carrying critical intelligence that saved countless American lives, Aldrich said, and it wasn't a question. While accomplishing the mission even under those conditions. While being the reason that position held long enough for extraction to even be possible. Jenna looked up at him sharply. How did you? Because that's what the Silver Star recommendation would have been for, Aldrich said gently. Not for surviving. For succeeding despite impossible odds. For bringing back intelligence while wounded and under fire. For being the reason that mission, despite its terrible cost, still achieved its objective. Before Jenna could respond, there was a sharp knock on the office door. Sergeant Brennan entered without waiting for permission, his face flushed with urgency. Sir, General Reeves' helicopter just called in. They're 15 minutes out, not 90. She pushed the pilot to maximum speed. And sir. He paused, glancing at Jenna with an expression that mixed respect with something like apprehension. She's bringing someone with her. Someone from the Department of Defense. They're requesting a secure facility for a classified briefing upon arrival. Aldrich stood immediately, his demeanor shifting from sympathetic listener to commanding officer managing an evolving situation. Who from Dodd? They wouldn't say over unsecure comes, sir. Just that it's someone with authority to discuss Sentinel-related operations. Jenna's face had gone pale. I don't understand. I've been out for 6 years. I've had no contact with military intelligence, no involvement with anything classified. Why would Dodd send someone here? Brennan shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, there's something else. About 20 minutes ago, while Colonel Aldrich was speaking with you, I received a call from Mountain Division G2. They ran your name through current databases, standard procedure. And something ... flagged, something that kicked your file up to levels I don't have clearance to access. What kind of flag? Jenna asked, her voice tight. I don't know, ma'am. But whatever it was, it triggered immediate notification protocols. Within 5 minutes of the database search, I had 3 separate calls, one from Division, one from INSCOM at Fort Meade. and one from an agency that identified itself only by a number code I didn't recognize. Aldrich's expression had become grim. What did they want? To know where you were, ma'am, Brennan said, looking at Jenna. To confirm your identity, and to ensure you remained on base until proper authority could arrive to speak with you. Jenna stood slowly, her backpack sliding off her shoulder and hitting the floor with a soft thump. Her mind was racing, trying to understand what was happening. Why her name dormant for 6 years was suddenly triggering responses from military intelligence agencies. I need to leave, she said quietly but firmly. Right now. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't have come. Jenna, Aldrich started. No. Her voice was sharper now, edged with something close to panic. You don't understand. When they start pulling files, when agencies get involved, when things get flagged at that level, it means something's wrong. It means someone thinks I'm a security risk, or I have information they need, or I'm involved in something I'm not. And I can't go through that again. I can't sit in debriefing rooms answering questions about operations that are supposed to be buried. About people who died in places we were never supposed to be. She moved toward the door. But Aldrich stepped smoothly into her path. Not threatening, not aggressive, but present. An obstacle that couldn't be simply walked around. I understand you're frightened, he said calmly. But General Reeves is coming here personally. A general doesn't do that for a security threat or a problem. She does that for someone who matters. Someone she wants to protect. Or someone she wants to control, Jenna countered. Someone who knows too much about things that were supposed to stay classified forever. Outside, they could hear the distant sound of rotor blades. Faint still, but growing louder. The helicopter was approaching faster than the 15-minute estimate had suggested. Brennan appeared in the doorway again. Sir, they're on final approach. Landing in 6 minutes on the main helipad. Aldrich kept his eyes on Jenna, his voice steady and certain. In 6 minutes, you're going to have answers. Maybe not all of them, but enough to understand why this is happening. I'm asking you, as someone who respects what you've sacrificed, what you've endured, to wait those 6 minutes. If after speaking with General Reeves, you still want to leave, I'll personally drive you to your truck and ensure you can go. Jenna's hands were shaking slightly. Adrenaline and old fear mixing with confusion and the weight of memories that had been dragged back into daylight. She looked at Aldrich, at Brennan, at the office that suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. The helicopter sounds grew louder, more distinct. Close now. Very close. 6 minutes, Aldrich repeated. That's all I'm asking. Jenna closed her eyes, her entire body tense with the urge to run, to flee, to return to the invisible life she'd built so carefully over 6 years of civilian existence. But underneath that fear was something else, a small voice that wondered if maybe, just maybe, there were answers waiting that she'd spent 6 years needing but being too afraid to seek. 6 minutes, she finally whispered. But if this goes wrong, if anything goes wrong, Aldrich interrupted firmly. You have my word as an officer and as someone who understands what you've been through. I will stand between you and whatever threat emerges. You're not alone in this. The helicopter sound reached a crescendo, then began to diminish as the aircraft settled onto the landing pad somewhere on the other side of the range complex. Engines winding down. Rotors beginning to slow. And Jenna Hartwick, survivor of Team Copper, bearer of classified secrets and survivor's guilt, stood in Colonel Aldrich's office and waited to discover why her past had suddenly decided it wasn't finished with her yet. The sound of footsteps approaching was precise, measured, carrying the distinct rhythm of military bearing. Multiple people, moving with purpose through the range headquarters building. Jenna could hear muted conversations in the hallway outside. Staff members being moved aside, doors being secured. The unmistakable sound of a high-ranking officer taking control of a space. Colonel Aldrich had positioned himself near the door, standing at a relaxed attention that still managed to convey respect. Sergeant Brennan had disappeared moments earlier to escort the arriving party from the helipad, leaving Jenna alone in the office with her racing thoughts and the terrible coffee that had gone cold in its cup. She'd considered running. The window behind Aldrich's desk faced the backside of the building, opened onto a maintenance area that led toward the perimeter fence. She could have been through it and gone before anyone realized, disappearing into the Wyoming landscape, the same way she'd learned to disappear in the mountains of Afghanistan. But something, pride, maybe, or curiosity, or just exhaustion from 6 years of running from ghosts, kept her rooted in place. The door opened without a knock. General Patricia Reeves entered with the kind of presence that made the room feel smaller. She was in her late 50s, medium height, but carrying herself taller, with steel gray hair cut in a precise style that managed to be both feminine and utterly military. Her uniform was impeccable Army combat uniform with subdued rank insignia, boots that had seen actual use but were still maintained to perfection. Her face was weathered in the way that came from years of field operations, not just desk work, and her eyes were the color of winter storm clouds. Sharp and assessing, behind her came a man in civilian clothes, dark suit, crisp white shirt, no tie. He was younger, maybe early 40s, with the kind of unremarkable appearance that screamed intelligence community. The type of person trained to blend into backgrounds and be forgotten 5 minutes after you met them. He carried a leather briefcase that looked expensive and probably contained documents that could end careers or start wars. Aldrich snapped to attention. "General Reeves, welcome to Fort Kersley." Reeves returned the salute with practiced efficiency. Then her eyes swept the room and locked onto Jenna with an intensity that felt physical. For a long moment, she simply stared, her expression cycling through several emotions too quickly to fully read recognition. Relief, something that might have been anger or might have been pain, and finally settling into something more controlled. "Hartwick," she said, her voice carrying traces of a Boston accent that military service had never quite erased. "Stand up." It was a command, delivered with the absolute authority of someone who expected immediate obedience. Jenna found herself standing before her conscious mind had fully processed the order. Years of military conditioning overriding her civilian instincts, Reeves crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. For a heartbeat, Jenna thought the general might strike her, might unleash whatever emotion was burning behind those storm cloud eyes. Instead, Reeves pulled her into a fierce embrace that lasted perhaps 5 seconds, but felt like an eternity. When she stepped back, Reeves' eyes were wet, though her voice remained steady. 6 years. 6 goddamn years I've had people looking for you. Do you have any idea?" She stopped, collected herself with visible effort. "We'll discuss that later. Right now we have a situation that requires your immediate attention." The man in the suit had moved to close the door behind them, then positioned himself near it in a way that suggested he was both guard and observer. Reeves gestured to the chairs, and everyone sat in a configuration that felt like a briefing more than a conversation. "Jenna, this is Special Agent Thomas Brenner from the Defense Intelligence Agency," Reeves said, her tone shifting into professional briefing mode. "He's here because 48 hours ago, something happened that concerns your former area of operations." Jenna's stomach tightened. "I've been out for 6 years. I don't have any current intelligence value." "That's what we thought too," Brenner said, speaking for the first time. His voice was neutral, carefully modulated, the sound of someone trained to reveal nothing through tone alone. "Until 2 days ago, when we intercepted communications from a terrorist cell operating in the Kunar province region. Communications that specifically referenced Operation Copper Strike. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Operation Copper Strike was the classified designation for the mission that had killed Team Copper. Jenna hadn't heard that name spoken aloud since her final debriefing 6 years ago. Sitting in a sterile room at Bagram Airfield, bleeding through bandages and watching intelligence officers take notes on everything she said. "That's impossible," Jenna said quietly. That operation was compartmented above top secret. The after-action report was classified at a level that shouldn't even exist in enemy intelligence databases. "How would—" "That's what we're trying to determine," Brenner interrupted smoothly. But the communications were very specific. They mentioned the date, the location, the objective. And they mentioned something else. They mentioned a survivor. Jenna's blood went cold. "They know I made it out." "They've always known someone made it out," Reeves interjected. "The extraction was observed, Jenna. We got you on that helicopter, but we couldn't hide the fact that someone survived. What we managed to hide was your identity. Your name was never in any reports that could be compromised. Your face was never in any photos that weren't secured beyond any reasonable level of penetration. As far as enemy intelligence was concerned, the survivor of Team Copper was a ghost reel, but unidentifiable. So what changed?" Aldrich asked, his strategic mind clearly working through the implications. Brenner opened his briefcase and pulled out a tablet, swiping through screens with practiced efficiency. 3 months ago, a mid-level Taliban commander was captured in a joint operation with Afghan security forces. During interrogation, he claimed to have information about American Special Operations soldiers who'd been operating in his area during the occupation. Most of it was bragging, exaggerated stories meant to make himself seem more important than he was. But buried in hours of interrogation transcripts, he mentioned something specific. He turned the tablet around, showing a translated document. Jenna leaned forward to read, and several lines made her breath catch. ... The American woman who killed our brothers in the mountains. She moved like smoke, shot like thunder. We found her position 3 days after the battle. She'd held ground that 5 men could not hold. The blood trails showed she was wounded, but still fighting when the helicopter came. We have sworn to find her and make her answer for what she did to our fighters." "This is just enemy propaganda," Jenna said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Exaggerated stories to justify their losses." "That's what we thought initially," Brenner agreed. "Until the intercepts 2 days ago. Someone connected that captured commanders' stories to Operation Copper Strike. Someone with access to detailed intelligence about that mission, intelligence they shouldn't have. And they're actively searching for you." Reeves leaned forward, her expression intense. "Jenna, someone on our side leaked information about that operation. Not everything, but enough. Enough that hostile intelligence now knows there was a female operator involved in a classified mission in Akunar province on October 14th, 6 years ago. They don't have your name yet, and they don't have your face. But they're looking." "How is this my problem?" Jenna asked, and there was an edge of desperation in her voice. "I've been out for 6 years. I drive trucks. I live alone. I don't have access to classified information anymore. I'm nobody's intelligence asset and nobody's threat." "You're the only person alive who was on that mountain," Brenner said flatly. "The only person who knows exactly what happened during those 7 hours. The only witness to events that apparently someone in our own intelligence community has been leaking to enemy forces." Aldrich, who'd been silent, processing this information, spoke up. "You think there's a mole? Someone with access to Sentinel program files who's been selling information?" "We know there's a mole," Reeves confirmed grimly. "We've been investigating for 8 months. Multiple compartmented operations have been compromised, always operations involving Sentinel-trained personnel. Information that should be locked behind security protocols that take presidential authorization to access is ending up in enemy hands. And now they're specifically hunting for Jenna because she's the last living witness to an operation where something happened. Something important enough that our mole has been trying very hard to ensure all evidence of it disappears. Jenna's mind was racing. Memories of that day flooding back with painful clarity. 7 hours of combat. Her team dying around her. The intelligence they'd gathered on that high-value target before everything went wrong. Intelligence that had been... Oh God, she breathed, the realization hitting her like physical impact. The target wasn't who we thought he was. Reeves and Brenner exchanged glances. "Explain," Reeves commanded. Jenna stood pacing the small office, her hands moving as she talked, reconstructing events from memory. "We were sent to observe and report on a mid-level Taliban commander. Standard reconnaissance. But when we got eyes on the target, Robert, my shooting partner, he recognized someone in the target's security detail. Someone who shouldn't have been there. Someone wearing American tactical gear with Afghan modifications. A contractor?" Aldrich suggested. "That's what we thought initially," Jenna continued. "We reported it up the chain, requested guidance. We're told to continue observing. But then we saw the target pass something to this person documents. A package, we couldn't tell exactly. And 30 minutes later, our position was compromised. Not by accident. Not by bad luck. Someone told them exactly where we were." Brenner was typing rapidly on his tablet. "This wasn't in any of the after-action reports. Because I never got to give a complete debrief," Jenna said, her voice tight with old anger. "I was wounded, in shock, and the intelligence officer who took my initial statement kept steering me away from certain details. Kept asking about the combat engagement, about enemy force disposition, about casualty figures. Every time I tried to mention the American in the target security detail, he'd redirect me to other topics. By the time I was stable enough to realize what was happening, I was being processed out on medical retirement. Sentinel program was disbanded. All records sealed. And I was told in very clear terms that any attempt to discuss classified operations would result in prosecution." "Who was the intelligence officer?" Reeves demanded, her voice sharp as a blade. "I don't remember his name. Didn't have visible rank. Civilian clothes. But he had credentials that got him into my hospital room ahead of everyone else. Ahead of you." She looked at Reeves. "Even though you were my commanding officer. He was there first, and he controlled the narrative of what went into that report." Brenner was scrolling through files on his tablet, cross-referencing dates and locations. "October 20th, 2019, Bagram Hospital. You were evacuated there from the field?" When Jenna nodded, he continued scrolling. "Security logs show multiple visits to your room. Medical staff, which is normal. General Reeves, yes, that's documented, and ... He paused, his expression darkening. "One visit from an individual identified only as DA-authorized personnel, credentials verified, no name. No other details. That's not protocol," Aldrich observed. "Even for sensitive debriefs. There should be identity verification for anyone accessing a wounded soldier. Unless someone with very high clearance wanted to ensure their identity remained unknown," Reeves said grimly. She turned to Jenna. "Can you describe him?" Jenna closed her eyes, pulling up the memory. White male, late 40s or early 50s. Graying hair, short military cut but no visible tan lines from a uniform cover. Expensive watch, I remember that because it seemed out of place. Spoke without accent, very educated. Had a way of asking questions that made you feel like you were being evaluated, not debriefed. And his eyes." She paused. "His eyes were wrong. Too calm, too controlled. Like he was listening to my trauma report, the way you'd listen to a weather forecast." Brenner's fingers had stopped moving on the tablet. His face had gone carefully neutral in the way that meant he'd just realized something significant. "General, I need to make a secure call. Right now." Reeves studied him for a moment, then nodded. Use the secure communications facility. Colonel Aldrich can show you where it is." Aldrich stood immediately, gesturing for Brenner to follow. As they left the office, Brenner was already pulling out a phone with what looked like military-grade encryption hardware attached to it. The door closed, leaving Jenna alone with General Reeves for the first time in 6 years. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken history. Finally, Reeves spoke, her voice losing some of its command edge and taking on something more human. "Why did you disappear, Jenna? After you were discharged, you vanished. No forwarding address, no contact information, no response to any of our attempts to reach you. I had people searching for 3 years before I finally accepted that you didn't want to be found." Jenna sat back down, suddenly exhausted. "Because everyone I cared about was dead, and the only people who seemed interested in me were intelligence officers asking questions designed to make me doubt my own memories. Because the army I devoted my life to apparently had someone in it who'd gotten my team killed and then tried to cover it up. Because I couldn't look at another rifle or another uniform or another mountain without seeing their faces." She looked at Reeves directly. "And because you couldn't tell me what they died for. I asked you in that hospital room before that intelligence officer showed up. I asked you if the mission was worth it. If what we learned was worth Tyler and Rachel and James and Robert. And you couldn't answer me." Reeves' jaw tightened. "I couldn't answer you because I didn't know. The intelligence you gathered was classified above my access level. I was your commanding officer. I selected you for that team. I sent you on that mission, and I wasn't cleared to know what you found or what it meant. All I knew was that 5 soldiers went into those mountains, and only 1 came back. And whatever you brought back with you was important enough that people way above my pay. Grade sealed it so tight I couldn't even file proper casualty reports, and now someone's hunting me because of information they shouldn't have about a mission that officially never happened," Jenna said bitterly. "So I guess we're both about to find out what my team died for." Outside the office, they could hear Brenner's voice, muted but urgent, speaking rapidly into his secure phone. Whatever he'd realized, whatever he was reporting, it was significant enough that his carefully maintained professional calm had cracked. Reeves stood and moved to the window, looking out over the range complex where civilians were still shooting, still laughing, still living their normal Saturday lives completely unaware of the classified drama unfolding in the headquarters building. "Jenna, I need you to understand something," she said without turning around. "Whatever happens next, whatever we uncover, I want you to know that I fought for your team. I fought for better intelligence, for more support, for recognition of what you accomplished. I was overruled at every level. And when you disappeared, part of me was relieved because I thought at least you'd escaped whatever political nightmare had consumed your mission." She turned to face Jenna. "But if there's a chance, now if we can finally expose whoever betrayed Team Copper, whoever got your people killed and then buried the truth, I need you to stay. I need you to fight one more time. Not with a rifle, with testimony, with truth." Before Jenna could respond, the door burst open. Brenner stood there, his face pale, phone still in hand. "General, we have a critical problem," he said, his careful neutrality completely abandoned. "The database search that flagged Ms. Hartwick's name this morning, it didn't originate from our investigation team. Someone else ran her identity through classified systems 45 minutes before Sergeant Brennan made his call to your office." "Who?" Reeves demanded. "We don't know yet. But whoever it was had access credentials that shouldn't exist outside of executive-level oversight. And 30 minutes ago, those same credentials were used to access her current location data, her vehicle registration, and her home address." The room went silent as the implications sank in. "They know where I live," Jenna whispered. "They know where you are right now, Brenner corrected grimly. And if they accessed that information 30 minutes ago, they've had enough time to. The sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere outside the building. Not the controlled, supervised shooting from the civilian ranges. This was different. Rapid, professional. Coming from the direction of the parking lot, someone was shooting at Fort Kersley itself, and Jenna Hartwick, survivor of Team Copper, realized that her past hadn't just caught up with her. It was trying to kill her. The gunfire came in controlled bursts, 3-round patterns that spoke of training and discipline, not panic. Jenna's body reacted before her mind caught up. Dropping below the window line and moving toward the corner of the office where the walls were solid, concrete rather than the thinner material used for interior partitions. 6 years of civilian life evaporated in an instant, replaced by instincts carved so deeply they might as well have been genetic. "Get down!" She barked at Reeves and Brenner, her voice carrying the sharp authority of someone who'd commanded in combat. Both moved immediately, Reeves drawing a sidearm from a hip holster Jenna hadn't noticed. Brenner pulling his own weapon while simultaneously hitting buttons on his phone. More gunfire, closer now. Then shouting military voices, range safety officers responding, the organized chaos of soldiers reacting to an active threat. Through the walls they could hear running footsteps, doors slamming, the mechanical sound of weapons being charged. Aldrich burst back into the office, his own sidearm drawn. "We have at least 3 shooters at the main entrance to the range complex. They came in civilian vehicles, presented what appeared to be valid visitor credentials, then opened fire on the guard post. 2 MPs are down, unknown status. Base security is responding, but another burst of gunfire, this time followed by the distinctive crack of rounds impacting the building's exterior. Someone was shooting at the headquarters specifically, not just creating chaos. They're not here to cause a scene," Jenna said, her mind working through tactical problems with the clarity that came from years of training. "They're here for extraction or elimination. Professional hit team, probably contractors, using the civilian event as cover for access." "This is a military installation," Brenner said, his voice tight. "They can't possibly think they'll get out of here." "They don't need to get out," Jenna countered. "They need about 90 seconds to complete their objective, then they'll disappear into the confusion. In a crowd of 40+ civilians with multiple points of egress. If they drop their weapons and blend into evacuating crowds, base security won't be able to identify them fast enough." Reeves was already on her phone, speaking rapidly to base command. "Lock down all gates. Nobody in or out. Civilian shooters are to be detained and separated immediately. I want every person on this base identified and accounted for within the next 5 minutes." Outside, the sound of approaching sirens mixed with continuing gunfire. The civilian shooting event had descended into chaos. Jenna could hear screaming, people running, instructors trying to maintain control while also taking cover. This was every range safety officer's nightmare, every base commander's worst-case scenario. "We need to move you," Aldrich said, looking at Jenna. "This building isn't secure. If they know you're here." "They absolutely know she's here," Brenner interrupted, holding up his phone. "I just got confirmation from our security team. The credentials used to access her location data 30 minutes ago were used again 7 minutes ago to pull up base facility layouts, including the range headquarters building schematic." "Then they know this office," Reeves said grimly. "They know exactly where we are." As if in answer, the distinctive sound of breaking glass came from somewhere else in the building, not close, but not far enough away. Someone had breached the headquarters through a window or back entrance. Jenna's eyes swept the office, tactical assessment happening automatically. One door, now compromised as an exit route. One window, facing the open range area, completely exposed. No secondary exits. They were trapped in a room that someone with bad intentions was actively moving toward. "We need weapons," Jenna said flatly. Real weapons, not just sidearms. What's the closest armory? 3 buildings away, Aldrich replied. But between here and there is open ground and shooters with overwatch positions, Jenna finished. So that's not an option. More footsteps in the hallway, these ones measured, tactical. Multiple individuals moving in coordinated formation, the kind of movement that came from team training. Not random shooters. Not even amateur contractors. These were professionals. Reeves moved to position herself beside the door, weapon raised, body language shifting into combat mode. For all her rank and years behind desks, she was still a soldier who remembered how to fight. Brenner, you're with me. Aldrich, cover the window approach. Jenna, give me a weapon, Jenna said, holding out her hand toward Aldrich. Now. Aldrich hesitated for only a heartbeat before drawing a backup piece from an ankle holster, a compact 9mm that felt small in Jenna's hand but was better than nothing. She checked the chamber with practiced efficiency, confirmed the magazine was full, and moved to position herself where she could cover both the door and provide crossfire support if someone came through the window. The footsteps stopped outside the office door. Silence descended, broken only by distant sounds of the ongoing chaos elsewhere on the base. Everyone in the office held their breath, weapons trained on the door, waiting for it to burst open, waiting for the violence that seemed inevitable. Instead, a voice spoke from the hallway. Male, calm, professionally modulated. General Reeves, I know you're in there. I know you have Jenna Hartwick with you. I'm here representing parties who have significant interest in Ms. Hartwick, remaining unavailable for any future testimony or intelligence cooperation. I'm authorized to offer you a simple choice. The voice paused, and in that pause, Jenna recognized something. Not the voice itself, she'd never heard it before, but the tone, the too calm delivery, the sense of evaluation rather than threat. You can allow Ms. Hartwick to come with us voluntarily, the voice continued. She'll be taken to a secure location, debriefed properly by appropriate authorities, and then relocated with a substantial financial settlement to ensure her continued discretion. Or you can resist, and we'll complete our objectives by alternative means. Those alternatives will be significantly more unpleasant for everyone involved. Reeves' face had gone hard as stone. This is a United States military installation. You've committed multiple felonies, including assault on federal officers. Your only option is immediate surrender. A sound that might have been a laugh came from the hallway. General, with respect, we both know that's not how this works. The parties I represent have authorization that supersedes your command authority. We're not here illegally. We're here on orders from levels of government you don't have access to. Bullshit, Aldrich growled. Is it? The voice replied. Then why hasn't base security stormed this hallway yet? Why haven't MPs surrounded this building? I'll tell you why, Colonel Aldrich. Because approximately 4 minutes ago, your base commander received a phone call from the Pentagon, directing him to stand down and allow authorized federal agents to complete a sensitive operation. He's confused, certainly. He's probably trying to verify that order right now. But until he receives countermanding instructions, his people aren't coming. Brenner's face had gone pale. He was frantically typing on his phone, probably trying to verify what they were being told. His expression suggested he was finding confirmation he didn't want to find. So let me make this very simple, the voice continued. Jenna Hartwick needs to come with us. We're not here to hurt her. We're here to protect extremely sensitive national security information that she possesses. Information that hostile intelligence agencies are actively seeking. We're offering her protective custody, proper compensation, and the opportunity to prevent classified material from being compromised. Jenna's jaw tightened. She'd heard variations of this speech before, 6 years ago, from the intelligence officer who'd controlled her hospital room debriefing. The same reasonable tone, The same framing of imprisonment as protection. The same assumption that she would comply because the alternative was too frightening to contemplate. "And if I refuse?" She called out, her voice steady. A pause. Then we're authorized to use necessary force to complete our mission. Your choice, Ms. Hartwick. Walk out voluntarily and maintain control of your situation, or force us to make decisions for you. Reeves looked at Jenna, silent communication passing between them. The general's expression was conflicted understanding that they were trapped, that the threat was real, but also unwilling to simply hand over one of her soldiers to people who'd already proven they were willing to kill to get what they wanted. Jenna's mind was racing through options. She could surrender, walk out, accept whatever they had planned. That was the safe choice, the one that kept Reeves and Aldrich and Brenner out of the crossfire. But she'd spent 6 years building a life away from people who treated her as an asset to be controlled, and the thought of voluntarily returning to that made her stomach turn, or she could fight. 4 people with sidearms against an unknown number of professionals with better weapons and tactical positions. The mathematics weren't favorable. Or there was a third option. "I have a counter-proposal," Jenna called out. "I'll come with you voluntarily, but only after General Reeves confirms with proper authority that your credentials are legitimate. Real verification, not just a phone call that could be spoofed. If you're really operating under legal orders, that shouldn't be a problem." Silence from the hallway. Jenna could almost hear the calculations happening. Whoever was out there weighing the benefits of compliance against the risks of delay. "That's acceptable," the voice finally said. "But you have 5 minutes. After that, we proceed with alternative protocols." Brenner was already moving, phone to his ear, speaking rapidly. "This is Special Agent Thomas Brenner, DIA, badge number 7-7-4-2-8. I need immediate verification of Federal Operation Authority at Fort Kearsley, Wyoming." "Yes, I'll hold." The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness. Outside the office, they could hear the men in the hallway moving slightly, maintaining positions, staying ready. The sounds of chaos from elsewhere on the base had diminished somewhat. Either security was getting control of the situation, or everyone was following stand-down orders that shouldn't exist. Brenner's expression grew darker as he listened to whoever was on the other end of his call. Finally, he lowered the phone, his face ashen. "There is an active federal operation authorized at this location," he said quietly. "Signed off by someone at the deputy director level of the CIA. All base security has been ordered to maintain perimeter control but not to interfere with the operation itself. Fort Kearsley's commander is currently on the phone with his chain of command trying to understand what the hell is happening. But until he gets different orders, his hands are tied." "The CIA," Reeves said, and her voice carried disbelief and anger in equal measure. "The CIA is conducting an armed operation on a domestic military base without oversight." "With oversight," Brenner corrected grimly. "Just oversight from people who apparently want Jenna Hartwick silenced more than they want to follow standard legal protocols." In that moment, Jenna understood the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about covering up a mission gone wrong. This was about protecting someone high enough in the intelligence community that they could authorize domestic operations, override military command structures, and commit federal crimes with apparent impunity. The mole that had been leaking Sentinel program information wasn't just some mid-level analyst. It was someone with real power. Someone who'd gotten Teen Copper killed 6 years ago and was now trying to eliminate the only witness who could connect them to that betrayal. "Time's up in 90 seconds, the voice from the hallway called. "What's your decision, Ms. Hartwick?" Jenna looked at General Reeves, at Colonel Aldrich, at Brenner. 3 people who'd tried to help her, who were now caught in a situation spiraling beyond anyone's control. If she went with these people, there was a very real chance she'd never be seen again. Protective custody would become permanent detention. Debriefing would become interrogation. And eventually, when they were satisfied, she couldn't reveal anything more. She'd have an accident that would barely make local news, but if she resisted, people would die. Maybe Reeves. Maybe Aldrich. Maybe civilians still evacuating from the range complex outside. She made her decision. "I'm coming out," she called. "Alone. Everyone else stays here." "That's non-negotiable." "Jenna, no," Reeves started. But Jenna cut her off with a look. "This is my choice, General. It's been my choice since the moment I walked onto this base this morning. Maybe I came here because some part of me knew this day was coming. Knew I couldn't run forever." She moved toward the door, weapon lowered but not holstered, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. Aldrich shifted to block her path, but Jenna put a hand on his shoulder. "Colonel, 6 years ago I watched my team die because someone with power and no conscience decided their lives were worth less than protecting secrets. I've spent every day since then trying to pretend that didn't break something fundamental in me. Maybe it's time I stopped running and started fighting back. But I need to do that my way." She reached for the door handle, her heart pounding but her hands steady. Whatever came next, whatever these people had planned, she would face it the same way she'd faced everything. Since Team Copper died, with the stubborn determination of someone who'd survived the unsurvivable and refused to be broken by it. But before she could turn the handle, a new sound cut through the tension, a voice over the base-wide announcement system, broadcast with crystal clarity to every building, every range, every corner of Fort Kersley. "Attention all personnel. Attention all personnel. This is a direct order from Forscom. All unauthorized federal operations are immediately terminated. Base security is authorized to detain any individuals claiming federal authority without properly verified credentials." This comes from the Secretary of Defense himself. Any resistance to base security will be met with appropriate force. In the hallway outside, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then cursing, rapid conversation, the sound of people moving quickly. Not toward the office, now away from it. Brenner's phone rang. He answered, listened for 5 seconds, and his face transformed from despair to something like hope. "Someone just threw the biggest wrench possible into whatever operation was happening," he said, lowering the phone. The Secretary of Defense personally intervened. "Whoever authorized this mess is about to have a very bad day." Reeves moved to the door, threw it open with her weapon raised. The hallway was empty. The professional hit team had been holding them at gunpoint moments before had vanished like smoke. Recognizing that their mission had just transformed from authorized operation to career-ending disaster. Outside, they could hear base security finally moving in, shouting orders, securing the building. Through the window, Jenna could see MPs flooding the range complex, separating civilians, beginning the process of identifying who belonged and who didn't. "How?" Aldrich asked, his voice bewildered. "How did the Secretary of Defense even know to intervene?" Brenner was reading something on his phone, and a slow smile was spreading across his face. "Because 20 minutes ago, while we were all focused on the immediate threat, General Reeves' aide, the young lieutenant, who was here earlier, took it upon himself to call every flag officer he could reach, starting with his own chain of command and working his way up. He reported an unauthorized armed operation on a military base and kept escalating until someone with enough stars actually listened." Reeves closed her eyes for a moment, and Jenna thought she saw something like pride flicker across the general's face. "I'm going to promote that lieutenant," she said quietly, "or court-martial him for going around proper channels. Haven't decided which yet." "Probably both," Aldrich muttered. But there was relief in his voice. Jenna stood in the doorway, looking out at the hallway where armed men had just been threatening to take her by force, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not relief, exactly. Not victory. but something like the first breath after being underwater for too long. "They'll try again," she said quietly. "Whoever's behind this, whoever has enough power to authorize CIA operations on domestic soil, they're not going to just give up because one attempt failed." "No," Reeves agreed, moving to stand beside her. "But now we know they're scared enough to take huge risks. Which means you know something they desperately want buried. And that, Sergeant Hartwick, makes you the most valuable intelligence asset we have." Through the window, Jenna could see the M24 rifle still sitting in its case at the demonstration area. Exactly where it had been when this entire day started. She'd come here this morning thinking she might touch a rifle again. Remember what it felt like to be the person she used to be. She'd gotten more than she bargained for, but as base security swarmed the complex and General Reeves began making calls to people who could actually protect her, Jenna realized something. For 6 years, she'd been running from her past, trying to leave behind the soldier she'd been, the team she'd lost, the mission that had broken her. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to finish what Team Copper had started. 3 hours later, Fort Kersley had transformed from a recreational shooting event into what looked like a scene from a spy thriller. Black SUVs with government plates lined the parking areas. Military police had established security perimeters at every entrance. The civilians who'd come for a fun Saturday morning had been interviewed, documented, and finally released. Most of them confused and more than a little shaken by what had turned into the most dramatic community outreach event in the base's history. Jenna sat in a secure conference room in the base headquarters building, not the range office anymore, but the actual command center where Colonel Aldrich and his staff normally planned training operations and managed base logistics. The room had been cleared of everyone except essential personnel, and those essential personnel represented a cross-section of military and intelligence leadership that would have been impressive under any circumstances. General Reeves sat at the head of the table, her uniform somehow still crisp despite the chaos of the past few hours. Beside her was a 2-star general Jenna didn't recognize, introduced only as General Hammond from INSCOM. Brenner was there, along with 2 other individuals in suits who'd arrived on a military flight 30 minutes ago and carried themselves with the particular bearing of people who solved problems that couldn't be acknowledged publicly. And then there was the woman who'd walked in 10 minutes ago and made everyone in the room sit up straighter. She wore a simple dark suit, carried a leather folder that probably contained documents with classification levels Jenna didn't want to think about, and introduced herself only as Ms. Kellerman from the Oversight Committee. The way everyone deferred to her suggested she represented someone very high up the chain, possibly congressional, possibly executive, definitely someone with the power to end careers with a phone call. Jenna's coffee had gone cold again. She seemed to be making a habit of that today. Her hands were steady though, and her mind was clearer than it had been in years. Something about being shot at tended to burn away the fog of avoidance and force you to confront things you'd been hiding from. "Let's start from the beginning," Ms. Kellerman said, opening her folder and producing a tablet. "Ms. Hartwick, I need you to walk us through everything that happened on October 14th, 2019. During the operation designated Copper Strike. Not the sanitized version that went into the after-action report. Not the version that intelligence officer extracted from you in the hospital. Everything." Jenna took a breath. This was it. The moment she'd been avoiding for 6 years. The testimony she'd been afraid to give. The truth that had cost her team their lives and nearly cost her own life today. "We were sent to observe a Taliban commander named Rashid Ahmed," she began, her voice steady. "Mid-level target, reportedly coordinating weapons shipments through the Kunar mountain passes. Standard reconnaissance mission observe, report, extract. We set up an overwatch position with sight lines on the compound where Ahmed was supposed to be meeting with his supply contacts. She paused, organizing her thoughts. Everyone at the table was listening with absolute attention, tablets ready to take notes, but nobody interrupted. The target arrived as expected, but his security detail included someone who didn't fit the pattern. Caucasian male, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing civilian clothes, but moving with obvious military training. He had tactical gear that was American-made, but modified radio equipment that was too sophisticated for Taliban operations. Body armor that was current issue U.S. military spec. "Did you photograph this individual?" General Hammond asked. "We tried." Robert Sergeant Dupree got several photos through the spotting scope. High resolution, clear facial features. We transmitted those images back through our secure communications link along with a priority intelligence report. 30 minutes later, we received orders to continue observation and identify any other unusual contacts. Jenna's jaw tightened. That's when things started going wrong. The American individual received a phone call. We couldn't hear the conversation, but his body language changed immediately, went from casual to alert. He spoke briefly to Ahmadi, then both of them looked directly at our position. Not in our general direction. Directly at where we were concealed, 300 meters away in terrain that should have made us invisible. "They were told your position," Kellerman said. "And it wasn't a question. They were told our exact coordinates," Jenna confirmed. Within 5 minutes, we started taking fire from multiple directions. Coordinated assault, professional execution. They knew our egress routes, knew our defensive positions, knew everything about our setup. It was like fighting an enemy who had our operational plan. She continued, describing the 7 hours that followed her team's defensive stand. The way they'd held impossible ground through skill and determination. The casualties that came one after another. She spoke about Tyler calling wind corrections even after he was wounded. About Rachel coordinating with command while bleeding from shrapnel wounds. About James holding the flank until his ammunition ran out, and then holding it with just a knife. About Robert shooting with precision that seemed supernatural until the moment he couldn't shoot anymore. "But before he died," Jenna said, her voice finally showing strain, "Robert told me something. He'd recognized the American in the security detail. Said he'd seen him during our training at Fort Bragg. Said the man had been at the Sentinel selection course as an observer, taking notes on candidates, asking questions about our backgrounds and capabilities." The room went absolutely silent. This was new information, something that hadn't been in any report. "Robert thought he was a Sentinel program evaluator," Jenna continued. "Someone from the Oversight Committee or from Special Operations Command, doing quality control on the selection process. But seeing him in Afghanistan, passing packages to Taliban commanders, having our position within minutes of being photographed. Robert realized what he actually was. A mole," Reeves said quietly. "Someone embedded in the Sentinel program from the beginning. Someone with access to every operator's file, every mission brief, every classified detail." Jenna nodded. "And someone who knew that if we reported seeing him, if those photographs made it back to proper intelligence analysis, his entire operation would be exposed. So he had us killed. All of us. The only reason I survived was because the weather cleared just enough for extraction before they could finish the job." Kellerman was typing rapidly on her tablet. "The photographs you transmitted, where would they have been routed?" "Through our communications specialist to Bagram Intelligence Operations Center," Jenna replied. "Standard protocol for Sentinel teams. All intelligence went through a specific desk at Bagram before being forwarded to higher analysis." "And who controlled that desk?" General Hammond asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer wasn't going to be good. Brenner had been working on his own tablet throughout Jenna's testimony. Now he looked up, his face grim. In October 2019, the Sentinel Program Intelligence Liaison at Bagram was a civilian contractor named David Marsh, former CIA, brought in specifically to handle the classified aspects of Sentinel operations. He had complete access to all intelligence flowing from Sentinel teams, and he controlled what got forwarded to higher command. "Let me guess," Aldrich said. "He's the intelligence officer who debriefed Jenna in the hospital." "We're checking that now," Brenner replied. But given that he had authorization to access wounded Sentinel operators without proper identification protocols, and given that he controlled the narrative of what went into the after-action report, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Kellerman looked up from her tablet. David Marsh retired from government service in 2020, moved to a private security consultancy that does contract work for various intelligence agencies. Very well compensated. Lives in a house in Virginia worth considerably more than his government salary would have supported. "So he's been selling information," Reeves said, and there was cold fury in her voice. "Selling Sentinel operator intelligence to hostile forces. Getting American soldiers killed for profit." "It's worse than that," Kellerman replied. She pulled up something on her tablet and turned it around so everyone could see. It showed a photograph of a man in his 50s, graying hair, expensive watch visible on his wrist. Jenna's breath caught. She recognized him immediately as the intelligence officer from her hospital room. "David Marsh has been under investigation for 8 months, Kellerman continued. "But we couldn't prove anything. No direct evidence, no paper trail, no witnesses willing to testify. Every operation he compromised ended with no survivors, except Marsh himself to tell the story. Until today, when we finally have a living witness who can place him in the intelligence chain, at the exact moment a Sentinel team was betrayed." She looked directly at Jenna, Ms. Hartwick. "We need you to testify. Formally, in a classified proceeding, with full legal protection. Your testimony, combined with the investigation we've been building, will be enough to not only charge Marsh, but to expose everyone he's been working with. Because someone authorized today's operation to take you by force. Someone high enough to mobilize CI assets for domestic operations. And we need to know who." Jenna sat back in her chair, the weight of what was being asked settling onto her shoulders. Testifying meant going back into that world she'd fled. Meant reliving the worst day of her life in excruciating detail. Meant making herself a target for people powerful enough to authorize armed assaults on military bases, but it also meant justice for Team Copper. Meant ensuring that Tyler and Rachel and James and Robert hadn't died for nothing. Meant preventing other soldiers from being betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect them. "I'll testify," she said quietly. "But I have conditions." Kellerman's eyebrow raised slightly. "You're not in a position to make demands, Ms. Hartwick." "I'm in the only position to make demands," Jenna countered, and there was steel in her voice now. "I'm the only living witness to what happened. Which means I'm either an asset you need to protect or a liability you need to neutralize. Today proved that some people in your organization view me as a liability. So before I put myself further into your hands, I need guarantees." Reeves was watching her with something like pride. This was the Jenna she'd trained, the soldier who could negotiate under pressure, who understood that information was power and leverage was everything. "What guarantees?" Kellerman asked carefully. "First, I want full immunity for anything I might reveal during testimony. I was told 6 years ago that discussing classified operations would result in prosecution. I need written documentation that testifying now won't be used against me later." "Granted," Kellerman said immediately. "Second, I want General Reeves directly involved in my protection detail. Not as the primary agent, but as oversight. Someone I trust watching the people who are watching me." Kellerman glanced at Reeves, who nodded. "Agreed." "Third," Jenna continued, and her voice dropped slightly, I want the full after-action report from Operation Copperstrike. The real one, not the sanitized version. I want to know what happened to those photographs Robert took. I want to know what intelligence we gathered that was worth my team's lives. I've spent 6 years not knowing what they died for. I'm done with that. This time Kellerman hesitated. Some of that information is compartmented above your former clearance level. Then grant me clearance, Jenna said flatly. Or find another witness. Because I'm not testifying about people dying for secrets I'm not allowed to understand. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Kellerman looked at General Hammond, who looked at Reeves, who looked at Jenna with an expression that conveyed both warning and support. Finally, Kellerman nodded. I can make that happen. But Ms. Hartwick, understand that once you see those files, once you know the full scope of what your team discovered, you'll be carrying information that makes you an even bigger target than you already are. I've been carrying their ghosts for 6 years, Jenna replied quietly. I can carry their truth too. Kellerman closed her folder with an air of finality. Then we have an agreement. You'll be moved to a secure facility within the next 2 hours. Full protection detail, complete communication blackout until we can assess the threat level. General Reeves will have oversight authority on your security. And I'll personally ensure you receive access to the complete Copperstrike files. She stood, and everyone else at the table rose with her. Ms. Hartwick, what you're doing takes courage. More courage than most people possess. Your team would be proud. After the others had filed out, leaving Jenna alone with General Reeves in the conference room, the general moved to sit beside her former operator. Are you sure about this? Reeves asked quietly. Once you testify, once you expose these people, your life will never be the same. The peace you've built in Wyoming, the anonymity, the distance from all of this, it's gone. Jenna looked at her hands, at the calluses that had come from driving trucks instead of handling rifles, at the scars that remained from wounds taken 6 years ago in mountains half a world away. I don't think I ever really had peace, she said. I had hiding. I had pretending. I had convincing myself that forgetting was the same as healing. But this morning, when I saw that M24, when I recognized that something was wrong with it from 6 feet away, based on nothing but a reflection of sunlight, I realized that I never stopped being the person Team Copper trained me to be. I just stopped acknowledging it. She looked up at Reeves. They died because someone decided American lives were less important than protecting secrets and making money. And I survived because, I don't know why. Random chance, luck, the grace of God if you believe in that. But I did survive. And maybe the reason I survived was so I could make sure this moment happened. So I could stand up and say their names and tell the truth about what was done to them. Reeves placed a hand on Jenna's shoulder, the gesture both professional and deeply personal. Tyler Moss, Rachel Kincaid, James Chun, Robert Dupree. I remember all of them. I remember selecting them for Sentinel training. I remember watching them graduate. And I remember getting the notification that they'd been killed in action in an operation I wasn't cleared to know about. Now you'll know, Jenna said. Now everyone who needs to know will know. And the people responsible will answer for it. Through the conference room window, the sun was beginning to set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. On the ranges below, cleanup crews were finishing their work, restoring order after a day that had started as a simple community event and ended with armed confrontation and the exposure of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military intelligence. Jenna stood, shouldering her backpack one more time. In a few hours, she'd be in a secure facility somewhere, beginning the process of formal testimony. Her life as a truck driver in a town of 847 people was over. Her anonymity was gone. Her carefully constructed distance from her military past had evaporated like morning mist, but for the first, Time in 6 years. Jenna Hartwick felt something other than guilt and grief when she thought about Team Copper. She felt purpose. "General," she said as they walked toward the door, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That M24 at the demonstration area. The one with the torqued scope mount. Can someone fix it properly? It's a good rifle. It deserves to be maintained by people who understand what it's capable of." Reeves smiled slightly. "I'll make sure Master Sergeant Dodson takes personal responsibility for it." "And Jenna? When this is all over, when you've testified and these people are brought to justice, if you ever want to come back to the ranges, if you ever want to teach the next generation of soldiers what real marksmanship looks like, there's always a place for you here." Jenna considered that as they walked through the headquarters building, past soldiers who snapped to attention for General Reeves and looked at Jenna with a mixture of curiosity and respect. She'd spent so long trying to leave this world behind, convinced that the only way to survive was to forget. But maybe surviving wasn't the same as living. Maybe living meant carrying the past forward, honoring the fallen by refusing to let their sacrifice be forgotten or their killers unpunished. Maybe living meant standing up when it was easier to stay hidden, speaking truth when silence was safer, fighting battles that weren't measured in bullets and body counts, but in testimony and justice and the slow, difficult work of making sure that good soldiers weren't betrayed by the people who were supposed to lead them. As Jenna climbed into the armored vehicle that would take her to wherever this new chapter of her life led, she looked back one more time at Fort Kersley. The ranges were empty now, the weapons secured, the demonstrations concluded. But somewhere in that complex, an M24 rifle sat in its case, waiting for someone who understood its capabilities to restore it to proper function. Just like Jenna herself had been sitting dormant for 6 years, waiting for the moment when she'd be called to function at her full capabilities again. That moment had arrived, and this time, when she pulled the trigger, metaphorically speaking, through testimony and truth, she wouldn't miss. Have you ever watched someone quietly endure injustice while carrying the weight of secrets that could change everything? Share this story with someone who understands that real courage isn't about never being afraid, it's about standing up and speaking truth, even when the entire world is trying to silence. Hit that subscribe button if you believe that those who serve deserve more than silence. They deserve justice. They deserve to be remembered. And they deserve witnesses brave enough to ensure their sacrifice meant something. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.